House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Rogers was an early advocate for U.S. involvement in the Libyan conflict. He joins us now to talk about what's going on and what happens next. Welcome, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks, Brett.
What do we know right now? The estimate, according to U.S. intelligence officials today and the Pentagon, was that Gaddafi is still somewhere in Tripoli. Do you believe that to be the case?
I do believe that's true, and I do believe he has still some loyal soldiers who will probably and likely fight to the death to defend him. So that's why you see some pockets of Tripoli are still under the Gaddafi regime control.
There is concern about some of the chemical weapons, some of the other weapons that Gaddafi had.
Yeah, very much so. He had, in 2004, he started the transition and he gave up his nuclear weapon program, which was more advanced than we believed. He gave up his chemical weapon program, his biological program to some degree. We're not sure if he gave up the whole thing. But what we do know is he has a large stockpile of chemical weapons still in his possession.
And we know this.
We know it. We've seen it.
Because we knew that there were...
We knew that they were there, and we never got to the place where we incinerated, which was the path we were on, to incinerate all of it, to get rid of it. Well, unfortunately, tons of it still exist. And we think there are still elements of the sarin gas that he produced there. And he has shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, they're called man-pads, that worry us greatly. And he has a lot of them, almost, well, I think the number might be classified, but there is a bunch of them. And those falling in the wrong hands, and we do know Al-Qaeda is trying to take advantage of this chaos, would be a disaster.
I mean, there was a Scud fired today. I guess there was one fired a few days ago. No one was injured. But is this kind of a situation that is very dangerous because it's kind of like a dog backed up against a wall and might do something with some of the weapons he has?
It could make that decision. And that is a concern, and it's a concern that we're worried about in the intelligence community. My biggest concern is this stuff gets legs and ends up walking off to elements that are not friendly to the United States or our allies. You can imagine one of these shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapons in the hands of Al-Qaeda becomes a very lethal terrorist weapon, or access to these chemical stockpiles. Those are the kinds of things where I think our national security interests are paramount. And as this unfolds, and I think the next 48 hours to the next week are incredibly important that we get this part right so that we secure our national security interests and help them become a democracy.
Well, what about that? You were briefed at the White House in March when the thing first launched. You said you didn't really think you needed a formal congressional declaration because unless the mission grew or dragged on. But now with NATO talking about possible boots on the ground, do you worry about mission creep here?
Well, the one thing that frustrated me the most about the administration is I didn't believe he made the case to the United. I believed in the case. I don't think the president made the case. And then the administration was not just bad, they were awful about bringing Congress in as a part of this solution. Clearly a small, defined mission. There are other things we could have done that maybe we should have done, but we could have been a little more aggressive without boots on the ground to have, I think, a more expedient outcome and put ourselves in a position where we could secure these weapon systems. We're going to have to do a little makeup here in order to do it. But I do believe the administration made a serious mistake by just telling Congress, not interested, don't have to do it, not going to talk to you. Horrible mistake.
This question about who are the rebels. You know, we've endorsed the Transitional National Council, as have other countries. Senator Susan Collins is the ranking Republican on Homeland Security. She said this, quote, "We still know little about the opposition, and it concerns me that eastern Libya has been a source of foreign fighters in Iraq and recruits for Al-Qaeda. The administration's plans for future U.S. involvement also remain vague and potentially very costly." You agree with that?
Well, we can manage the costly part. We shouldn't allow ourselves to get involved to a costly end. That we don't have to do. There are other things. There are actions we can take that aren't expensive but secure our national security interests, and we allow them to develop as a country. By not being involved at all or just saying we're not going to do it, leaves it at the hands of Al-Qaeda and these elements in the TNC, the Transitional National Council, that we don't know. And we know that we have tribal factions that are already starting to stir a little bit. We know that we have ethnic differences that are starting to stir a little bit. The way you deal with that is not by pulling up and leaving completely, is you at least have a voice at the table to try to smooth this out, that you get a better outcome. I think that would be the wiser choice, and it's the least expensive way to do it as well.
Speaking of which, and the last thing, the Department of Defense said today that the operations in Libya have cost roughly $900 million through July 31st. So as this is not over yet, $900 million, is this worth it?
Well, when you talk about where Gaddafi was, we knew that his regime was crumbling. We know that al-Qaeda was using Libya to some smaller degree to infiltrate people to Iraq at one point. We also know that they had a strong interest in getting their hands on nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. And by the way, Osama bin Laden's compound, information obtained there, re-clarified for us that they have an interest in doing that. My argument in the beginning was we could talk about the fact that we wanted to protect civilians, but the U.S. national security interest were those weapon systems falling in the hands of some pretty bad actors.
Which we still don't know.
Well, no, and again, the next week or 2 weeks is going to be critically important for that. And remember, most of that cost was up front with the firing of those missiles. Every missile they fired off the rails of those ships was about $1 million apiece.
Chairman Rogers, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hope you'll come back.